Thanks for having me. Happy to be here. I can talk a little bit more about that transition from an employee mindset to a founder mindset. So, for background, I am an engineer by training. I had about, let's see, maybe about 10 years of experience writing software when I started Yembo. I went to engineering school, studied computer engineering, kind of followed in the expected tracks. I went and I got a job at a telecom company and was a low level software engineer for about 5 years. And the cool part about AI is it is causing changes across the board in every industry. And this is somewhat unusual and rare. I feel like most of the time in technology, when there's a new piece of technology that comes out and an innovation that comes, it's generally relegated into a particular area. And what AI is doing across the board, things are changing in transportation and logistics, in home services, all across the board. AI is changing things. So I feel like if you're interested in starting a company, don't try to just be an expert in AI, but try to find an intersection between AI and some other industry. And at that intersection is where the interesting stuff lies. And that's exactly what my story was. So I was working at a telecom company, Qualcomm, and spent a few years working as a software engineer, had an opportunity to switch teams and joined an innovation team where we were looking at new innovative methods of areas that the company could grow in. AI was a big area of focus. And my wife was working at a moving company. So at by day, I'd go out to these industry conferences, trade shows, get to see the what's going on in the industry with self-driving cars and drones and all these crazy new applications that AI was advancing. And then I'd come home and my wife was showing me the amount of logistics and complicated planning it takes to do a proper move. She worked in an international moving team, so it wasn't just packing things up, although they did have to do that, but there were customs, different languages, different time zones, just very logistically complicated. So I had this firsthand direct insight into how smoothly a move can go when everything's planned well, and all the different issues that can come up if something is misestimated or not sized correctly. And that was kind of the inventive step that caused me to believe that there could be something here at that intersection between AI and this industry that historically hasn't used much technology. And there was a lot of work around studying the market and understanding what the real problems were. But the more we learned about the space, the more we realized it's not just home services, or not just moving, rather. Plumbers and painters and property insurance, all these other home services also have similar issues. It's very complicated and difficult to provide a price quote because you need to be a trained expert. And that kind of finding that intersection between what computer vision technology is good at doing and this pain point that clients were having in this field was kind of the genesis of where it all came from.
AI, we can consider AI a giant leap, like like the creation of steam or electric, electric energy, something like that. Something is a giant leap in the development of humankind. What do you think about that?
Mm-hmm. I think that's a great analogy. I think if you look at electricity, who does that apply to in the world today? It's basically everyone. It's not a particular industry. It's not a particular um, like demographic that's interested in it. And I feel like we're in the early days for sure, but that's likely where I feel it's going to end up. Is if you look at what opportunities AI is opening up and what use cases are available now that even 6, 12 months ago was impossible. I think it's causing us to reconsider a lot of different things, just like what happened during the invention of the automobile and the Industrial Revolution. And I think the key thing to remember here is if you look back at those times of intense change, they're, they ended us up in a place that was, I would say, better than where we started off. Now, I know change can be scary, and there's a lot of, I would say, concern around AI replacing people. And I actually don't see it really happening that way. I think if you look at, there's a McKinsey article that came out somewhat recently where they polled Fortune 500 leaders and managers and executives, and it looked like most people were planning, almost every company was planning on incorporating AI into their workflows. but there weren't headcount reductions to go along with that. It was more along the lines of having certain tasks to be automated. And I think this is the key: is AI is powerful and can do a lot of interesting things, but it is still an algorithm at the end of the day. It can't do everything. So if you look at things like large language models, for instance, they're trained on large amounts of data, and by nature, they can't really make anything new because they're trained on somewhat like regurgitating things that have already been created. Um, and I think that means that there are certain areas and workflows that things work well, but I don't know who would hire an employee who could never do something new. I think that creative element of what it means to be a human will still need these things. So overall, I'm an optimist. I think this is going to create more things and it's going to disrupt, and I think it can leave the world in a better place. I mean, I benefit from automobiles. I benefit from electricity. It's kind of nice in the summer times to have air conditioning. Now, there were a lot of changes that went along with that industrial revolution, but I would say if you zoom out and look at the bigger picture, it definitely left the world in a better place than we started off at.
Your company use computer vision and AI together, if
Mhm.
I'm right. What do you think about the future of your company, your product, and also how computer vision can be used in connection with AI?
Our company provides computer vision technology to home service companies, and we're on a mission to streamline that process across the board for everybody. If you look at these home service companies, everybody needs these services. Nobody seems to really enjoy the back and forth and the operational overhead that goes along with it. Moving is one of those things that people do because they have to. I don't know many people who move for fun. Similarly, with buying property insurance and things like renovation, junk removal, you do these things because you need it done, but it doesn't necessarily, it's not something you'd like want to do on your vacation, for instance. And what we have the ability to do is take this point in time in people's lives where they're generally stressed out, they have a lot on their plate, a lot that they need to worry about, and make that overall process easier and better and faster for everyone involved. So I see it as quite different from a company like maybe Uber or someone who goes in to disrupt. I don't see taxi companies liking the Uber model. It was very contentious. But I think what Yembo is doing is very different in that we're coming in and we're helping these service providers provide a better, more digital, more streamlined customer experience. So we're not disrupting them as much as we're providing them tools to give them superpowers. And I think that's where I see the company in the next 5, 10 years is just like if you have a search that you want to do, you Google it. If you have a home service that you need, I could see you wanting to Yembo that.
Yeah. How you start the company? Like in how you have the idea basically, and also you find how you find the money basically, if through venture capital or to family and friends. How was the process?
Sure. So I had the idea, as you mentioned. When I had the idea, I actually had already left Qualcomm and I was working doing consulting work for various startups. And Yembo was sort of one of the projects that I took on that didn't pay me anything yet, but I treated it like one of the projects that were kind of keeping me paying the bills and things like that. And I feel like in these early days, focus is really key. So when I started this thing, it was just an idea. We didn't have any customers, didn't have any team, and I treated it sort of like you might an expensive hobby. Is I talked to my wife. We got a budget. Here's how much money I was allowed to spend. We had some parameters around how much time I was going to sink into this before it could pay off, and we had some guidelines around. We wanted to bring in the first paying customer in the first year, and there are a lot of startups where maybe that doesn't work. Um, Things like landing on Mars and building colonies, sometimes you need to have a longer time horizon. But for where I was personally, I feel like I wanted to be able to innovate in an area, bring AI into a space that AI was not in, but I didn't have like a 10, 15-year time horizon. I had to have the thing work in about a year. So I treated it as a consulting project that actually took the time pressure off in a sense. Like I didn't have my income cut to zero. So that was helpful. And what we did then was we called a bunch of moving companies. We got some letters of intent signed. We kind of like validated that there was a business to be had there. And once we had enough validation that that was going to be useful, as an engineer by training, I built the initial version of the product just myself, front end, back end, design, the whole shebang. I wouldn't say it was particularly elegant, but it was like good enough to get the point across. And we were able to ultimately bring in our first few customers, and then we used that to go raise our initial round from angel investors. So we did end up going that route, but I would say we did it pretty much like as late as we possibly could have, where we had it paying customers, they had expectations on the product. It's software as a service, so if you don't impress your clients, they can cancel and leave. So we're kind of at that point where we had figured out the pricing model enough to get the first few customers, figured out the value prop enough to get the first few sales. And then we had customers using it, they had expectations, they were asking for features, and it was kind of like the time where we had to decide, is this going to be a hobby? It's just going to be a real company. And then we decided to go for it.
Yeah, if I'm right, your application don't need any lidar or different kind of technology. Basically, need only a camera and a smartphone to run an estimate
That's correct.
of.
The product runs in a web browser. We don't even need to download an app. And it'd be a
Okay.
lot easier if we could download an app. But what we found from a customer perspective is they're just shopping around. They have no, I would say, brand affinity yet. So they had to actually, if you ask them to go to the App Store, agree to your terms of service, download the app, set up an account, there's just all this friction. And we found that, did a couple early tests and found that adoption rates are pretty low when you did that. But the fundamental science behind what we're doing is we realize that human beings actually don't have LiDAR. It's a helpful tool in certain examples, but if you look at this TV here, you can kind of get a sense for how big it is by looking at what's around it and how much space it's taking up. Um, and that's how the moving industry works, is you don't need to scientifically tell me down to like the gram, if you put this thing on a scale, how much the
Yeah.
item weighs. It's more around getting reasonably accurate approximations based on vision, which is one thing that deep learning and computer vision technology is well equipped to do. It's kind of a subtle distinction, but I feel like this is kind of important when you're looking at bringing AI into a new space. Is AI is awesome, it's powerful, it's an algorithm and it's a tool. So if you're in a situation where a trained human couldn't perceive something out of the information you're giving it, it's probably going to be impossible for an AI to do it as well. It's not magic. But by learning enough about the space where we learn this kind of subtle distinction, like yes, we need to come up with size estimates, but no, getting it down to the fraction of a pound or a gram isn't really needed. That's when we realized that the problem we were setting out to solve was solvable with the technology that was available today.
Yeah. Seems that you put a lot of effort in your company and in your product. How your mindset affect this way of thinking, this behavior?
It's almost like a bit addicting, I would say. And that is when you realize that there's a problem and you can see how the technology can solve the customer's needs. It takes maybe 6 months to a year before other people can start seeing it too, because it's like all in your head and you're sitting at this intersection of AI and moving. And some clients have background in moving but don't understand AI. Some people understand AI and they don't know moving. So it's really all driven by solving a customer pain point and then being able to see when you deliver something, how it impacts their workflow and how it makes them more efficient. It helps solve operational problems. And then you get the kind of the flywheel in motion. And the more effort you put in, then the more outcomes that you see come out of it. And I think that's kind of what motivates to keep going, is starting to see the results of what you're doing. Initially, we thought we would have a tool that would make it easier for clients to settle disputes. Like, for instance, if I say you damaged my 5 TVs, but I didn't have 5 TVs, then in the previous technology, when you're just talking over the phone, there's not really a ground truth of who's right. So it comes down to how much money I'm asking for. Like, do you want to just maybe pay the damage claim and have me go away? So we figured like having the images and videos would help with that. And it does to an extent, but what we really found was people didn't have the arguments in the first place. Like there are, I guess, certain perceptions that a customer may have where they don't try to pull something off if they know they agreed to a list of pictures, whereas if there is something a bit more subjective, they would. So we found like it's not like a tool that helps settle arguments. It's a tool that provides a better client experience and prevents the argument in the first place, which is a much more powerful and compelling value proposition.
So,
But we kind of had to deploy and learn and see these things. I don't think I could have predicted going in that that was how it was going to play out.
yeah. And tell me also about the key topic of your book, Grow Up Fast. What is the key message of your book, basically the key point of your book?
Sure. Yeah. So the book, I got one here. It's called Grow Up Fast: Lessons from an AI Startup. And
Yeah,
I
we,
wrote
we we
it.
can buy it. We can buy it through Amazon and Apple Books, all these
Yep.
websites, right?
Yep, it's on Amazon, it's on Apple Books. If you go to growupfastbook.com, you can see the links, or go to your favorite bookstore and search, it's there as well.
Yeah.
But it came out earlier this year, and it's a consolidation of everything I'd say impactful that I've learned in the last 7 years of running an AI company. So we talked about in the early days getting the product up and running off the ground. How do you find your first customers? How do you validate the product before you sink a bunch of time and effort into building it? Building AI, especially bespoke AI, is very expensive and time consuming. So there were some exercises that we went through to confirm that this was actually going to be useful. Then once we get things up and running, it turns into running a company. And that means listening to client feedback, balancing the near-term goals with the longer-term creative visions of where we want to have the company go. At some point along the way, you have to learn to manage a team. And it's not just one person anymore, where you need to kind of make sure that the team that is working on your product has the right people in their orbit, that they can get their jobs done. And I think this was one thing that I learned kind of the hard way, where I had a relatively strong network. My inner circle, I had my co-founder, I had previous colleagues, I had investors, advisors, customers. If I had questions come up, and a lot of problems came up where I didn't know the answer, I had a pretty good network where I could usually reach out to somebody who knew more than I did in that particular area and kind of get feedback and get unblocked. And as the team grew, I realized that the people on my team didn't necessarily have the same network that I did. So I saw it as my responsibility to make sure that if they have certain goals that they're working towards, that they're trying to achieve, it's like the leader's responsibility to give them people in their network and make sure that they have the resources that they need to be able to be successful with that. So there are some lessons kind of learned along that way, from kind of not just building the product, but building the company and the workflows and the teams as well. I feel like every 6 months or so, we're retooling something, kind of refining some process and streamlining things a bit more. But I would say, is like the whole overall story around starting an AI company. It's not just about the technology, it's not about the people, it's not just about the product, but just kind of general advice that I would give somebody who is looking to either start an AI company, start an AI based project, maybe get more literate with AI to bring it into an existing company, existing workflow, existing team. I think a lot of the challenges that come up, it doesn't necessarily only happen if you're starting a company. It also happens if you try to have the technology meet a paper-based or process that predates AI.
Do you have any daily routine, or you use some tools to be more productive?
Yeah, I try to keep a consistent daily routine. That way you don't have to think about what you're supposed to do next. I also have found that being realistic about these things is helpful. So I didn't want to be super ambitious at the start of the year and then by like the third week in January, kind of give up on everything. So I have different kinds of goals. I think there are certain goals like showing up to work, making routine meetings. It's like non-negotiable. You have to do that. I have other goals on things that are a bit more flexible. So for me personally, I'm happy if I get to the gym 3 days out of 5. I've tried before to do all 5, and sometimes you kind of like binge and then you lose the momentum, and then I had a hard time going. But I found a lot of things in work are like that too, where you need to work on certain things, but it doesn't necessarily mean like you need to force yourself to spend 1 hour every single day. So like being mindful around like these are the must-have goals that I can't change, and these are the ones that it's like, okay, if I get 50-60% of the way there. And I found those kinds of things have been helpful around just kind of prioritizing your time. I found the worst way to do it is just respond to whatever comes up in the order it comes up, because then you're just letting whoever chooses to email you kind of prioritize your day. So just by kind of categorizing and saying, okay, for like this quarter, we're working on these particular initiatives, and then kind of recalibrating there, I found that to be pretty helpful.
Do you have any book apart from yours to suggest to my audience? A must-read book about some topic that you find it's really important to know.
Sure. I found a lot of really good books out there, and there's actually a reading list in the back, but I can tell you a couple of the favorite ones that come to mind. Um, there's a book called Build by Tony Fadell. He was the inventor of the Nest thermostat, as well as one of the leads on the iPod at Apple. And that book is designed to be like a mentor in a box. So he shares just lessons that he's learned across his long career in technology. So that one I found to be really interesting because it teaches you things that you wouldn't learn um, just like looking at the company, looking at the product. He tells about like the discussions that happened before a big decision was made and things like that. So that's an interesting way to kind of learn about somebody who's been successful's mindset and like how they approach problems. Um, Another really helpful one that I've used personally is there's two books by Nancy Duarte, Slideology and Resonate. And investors, entrepreneurs spend a lot of time pitching investors, pitching clients, like presenting. And she breaks down and studies what makes a really compelling, awesome presentation and gives like practical tips around the way that you structure your thoughts, the way that you present it both visually and spoken and body language. And it's just, I bought the book, I think 11, 12 years ago now. I still have it back here and still refer back to it. Um, and third one I would say is there's a book called Venture Deals, and that one is intended to be read by a not expert. Like if you're a founder and you're looking to start a company and you're thinking about taking in investment money, but you're not super savvy, that one is like a good crash course on financing terms and things like that that I found to be pretty helpful. Where um, there's an information imbalance if an investor is professionally investing, they do it all day, every day. You as a founder don't, and it helps close that knowledge gap a little bit and free up information so that you can understand like what you're really getting yourself into.
How often do you use tools like ChatGPT, and what do you think about the fact that these tools can write code basically?
I am a tinkerer. I play with everything that comes out, so I probably use ChatGPT a couple times a day. I think there are certain things it does well, and there are certain things it doesn't do well. I have yet to be successful replacing myself as a software engineer when I'm wearing that hat. And as a founder, I wear so many hats. If there's one I could replace, I probably would. But the issue that I've run into with it is it's really keen to give you an answer. It's not very quick to like ask clarifying questions, make sure it understands. So what I found, for instance, is if you have like a high level specification, something that you would hand off to an engineer and say, here's like a prompt, can you do it? It'll give you something, but like half the time you run it, it maybe doesn't work. But I would say that's maybe not the best way to use the technology. I've had more luck breaking a big problem down into smaller ones. So as I'm writing code, I can ask it questions and say, is this the most efficient way to do this? Can you give me two or three other strategies? And having the AI be used as more of like a coach or a tutor, as opposed to trying to be a replacement for exactly what I'm doing, I've just found that to be more successful. And I think just by nature of how that technology works, it's more conducive to being helpful if you don't expect it to get absolutely everything right. Because at the time that you're trying to run the code, everything needs to be right or it's going to crash or give you the wrong output. And I've just found being able to ask it more open-ended questions, maybe have it help me with like a smaller part of the problem, making it a little bit more scoped. Um, I've just found it works a little bit better there.
Okay. Last question. What's your future vision of your company of Yembo? And there is any other product that you want to develop, or there is other company that you are thinking about, like as a new company or a new project?
I think I got my hands full with the company I got right now, so I'm not thinking about the next one quite yet. But I feel like we still have a long ways to go. Um, I told you about Yembo today. You probably didn't hear of it before we started talking, and I feel like where we're going next is building a world where people can have just as easy of an experience when they're working in home services as when they buy something on Amazon. And that means that we have quite a bit of work to still do. there are other industries that we haven't tapped yet. We're looking at a bunch of different ones where we can leverage the technology we built in the moving space. We've recently launched in property insurance here in the US. So I think that's another big exciting industry where, again, people kind of overlook that part of the process in their when they're buying a house because there's so many things that they need to go through. But if you get that amount of coverage wrong, it's really a big deal. So that's why we feel like we can really help and give a really easy and quick process that makes sure that you are kind of teed up for success in your after your transition. And that's where we see Yembo going, where general contracting has this issue, painting, plumbing, flooring, so many different directions we can go in next. And until Yembo is a household name, we still have work cut out for us.
One more thing. What are your plans for European markets? And do you have any client in Europe?
Yeah, we actually do have quite a few clients in Europe. Most of our clients are here in the US, but moving is very heavily networked. So a lot of movers know other movers because a lot of times you need to work together if it's like an international move. So I would love to see more. It hasn't been like our number one focus from day one, but we have made a more concerted effort as of more recently, like going through GDPR, getting all of that figured out. So I would love to be in a position where we are kind of equal 50-50, like your US and the rest of the world. Um, I think it's really interesting too, the cultures and the differences that you find. When we first launched with our customer, one of our first customers in the UK, we had a problem where there was a American moving to London, and the sofa chair couldn't fit in the doorway because American furniture, I guess, tends to be so much larger than English
Yeah.
furniture. And it was an example of like the cultural differences that you have, and how you need to be able to like have your AI really understand the customer base that it's serving. And yeah, I think being able to have a Europe office, being able to service everyone across the world would be interesting. I think we're starting there, but it's just there's just a lot of work to do a good job. So that's why it hasn't been like a overnight flip a switch kind of thing, because you need to really get all those kinds of details correct. Otherwise, you're not really ready to go.
So, okay, Zachary, thank you very much for your time, and thank you again to join me.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Daniel. Have a good night.